Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 5 of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. I'm pleased to welcome in my first guest from the Midwest. It's none other than my friend, Mitch Speltz. Mitch, it's great to be back with you. It's been a while.
You as well, Billy. It's good to hear your voice again. We kept in touch a little bit, but not the Northwoods League touch we used to have. But no, it's good to hear from you, buddy.
Yeah, for sure. So, obviously, it's a treat to have Mitch on the show because all my guests up to this point have pretty much been – not that I've known all of them, but Mitch is unique in the sense that he's from the Midwest. Again, someone I know from my Midwest connections. And so it's nice to sort of get that perspective on this show. So, Mitch, like most of the other guests we've had, as a play-by-play broadcaster, wants to go into that for a career. He's also done work with a radio show and everything. So we'll get started. First of all, I do want to reiterate that both Mitch and I were in the Northwoods League for a summer, which is how we have a mutual connection. So, Mitch, I kind of just want to start off with what made you decide to want to pursue sports broadcasting, and how do you feel about that these days?
You know, Billy, this is it's always been the dream for me. It's been something I've wanted to do for a long time because I've been such a fan of sports. You know, I love football, I love baseball, I love basketball. And, you know, there were days growing up where I dreamed of being a player someday. But obviously, once you come to the realization that that's not going to happen, especially for a guy like me, you know, there's other ways to get into it. And then once you really start talking about sports and get into it, you really feel passionate about it and want to pursue it. And play-by-play has always been the route I want to go. Of course, I'm open to other options as well, but play-by-play has always been my thing. I love watching games sometimes just for the fact of who's calling it. You know, those kinds of things really interest me. I like, you know, I have my favorites of who I like. You know, I don't have too many people I don't like to listen to, but it's like I love studying play-by-play broadcasters, pick things up from them, learn something. But, yeah, that's always been really my career of choice for a long time now.
Do you have a favorite play-by-play broadcaster? Do you have, you know, a couple that you really love to listen to?
I would say that Brian Anderson is probably my favorite one. He's the Brewers broadcaster. As you can see, I'm a pretty big Brewer fan here. Yeah, he's been doing Brewers on TV for a long time, and he's the professional what he does. And I think a lot of people have noticed, I think, how he's risen through the ranks. He does a lot of national TV for baseball, NBA, college basketball as well. So he's moved up the ranks quite a bit since he took over in Milwaukee. But he's a guy that I watch and listen to quite a bit. And I've learned quite a bit from watching him. And I've met him a few times as well through events that I've covered before. So he's a great person, and I've learned a lot from him, no doubt.
Yeah, and he's I think he really sort of became popular with sort of the young people when he was part of Ernie Johnson's school. I'm sure you saw on Twitter. With school broadcasting, helping to make that work, obviously, during this time with the pandemic. So what are you doing right now? I mean, I know obviously sports are on a halt for the time being. You know, you want to be a play-by-play broadcaster. What have you been doing to sort of keep yourself fresh? Have you been calling recorded games? I mean, what are you doing to kind of help yourself stay fresh?
You know, I haven't been able to do obviously any play-by-play recently. I've been mostly doing part-time work to keep myself busy. But in terms of my career and what I've been able to do during this time, I've gone back and watched quite a bit of my tape recently, especially my basketball play-by-play, because I think that's the most recent that I've done. I got a chance to call college basketball for the first time this year. So really trying to pick things up on that, kind of develop a little bit of a tape from that is what I've really been focusing on. Even going back a little bit, this will be my third year upcoming the Northwoods League if there is a season. I've been watching some games from 2 years ago, my first season, and it's a pretty good trip down memory lane when I was up working in Duluth. So really going through my tape a little bit, and, you know, I would love to have some perspective on baseball going into the season, but, it's hard to really prepare yourself or rep yourself when there's no baseball going on. It appears there's no baseball going on in the near future.
And speaking of your Northwoods League experience, again, that's how we know each other. The one summer we worked together, I believe it was summer of 2018. Mitch was one of the broadcasters for the Duluth Huskies, and I was a broadcaster for the Lacrosse Loggers, which coincidentally is where Mitch is from. So obviously a lot of connections there. And I really, more than anyone else, I really feel like you are Mr. Northwoods League because you've done it for 3 summers with the Duluth Huskies, and last year you're with the Rochester Honkers, and this year, if there is a season, you'll be with the Mankato Moondogs. So for those, for people who don't know what the Northwoods League is, how would you describe it?
It would be a developmental league for sure. And I think on multiple fronts. Obviously, you look at it from a player perspective, that's a pretty good league to really prepare yourself for affiliated ball in the future, potentially get yourself in a spot to get drafted. It's not really the highest one out there, but it's one of the probably top 3 out there summer collegiately, and there's a lot of them. But it's not just for the players as well. I think it's for broadcasters, anyone who wants to work, in a press box, work in the media, even the front office as well. It's a developmental league on all fronts. I mean, there's a lot of people my age, you obviously know this, that work in the Northwoods League and aspire to get to the next level. And that's where I'm hoping to get sooner rather than later. And I'm grateful for the opportunities I've gotten in the Northwoods League to build these relationships that I've had, develop my skills. And I can tell you, just talking about looking back on 2018, picking up on some things about that last year, I think I developed quite a bit and hoping to do so more in the 2020 season. If there is one, obviously hopeful for that. We'll see. There's a lot of things going on in the world that, are obviously very important and more important than sports at this point. But, just the ability to develop and put yourself in a position to get to the next level is what the Northwoods League is all about.
And you, like I said, not only have worked in the Northwoods League, you've worked with some historic teams. I mean, Duluth, I think the stadium you were in, Wade Stadium, was built around the 30s. And then you've got Rochester, which is where the headquarters of the league are and one of the first expansion teams, first teams that were created in the league. So do you have any great stories from, those times you're working in Duluth or Rochester? I mean, certainly 2 historic teams, and you had the chance to see a couple sides of Minnesota.
I don't know if I have one story in particular, but I think there's a lot I've taken from. And, the path I've gotten to this point isn't necessarily what I planned going from Duluth to Rochester, Mankato, but I'm very grateful for all the opportunities there. But I would say with Duluth, I mean, that team was a pretty historic one. That was a team that really, as a franchise, didn't have all that much success going into that season. And we were a team that just took off at the start of the season, and that was a pretty fun group to be around. I believe they had the most wins in franchise history for a season. They got all the way to the Northwoods League championship game. And I remember game 3, the winner-take-all game against Fond du Lac was probably the highlight, I would say, of my broadcast career so far. It wasn't a jam-packed Wade Stadium, even though it holds quite a bit. It wasn't jam-packed, but the atmosphere was just different. And, just being able to call a game of that magnitude and the game we came up just short in was something I was grateful to be a part of. It was such a fun team. They had such a great staff, a great group of players to work with, and even better group of individuals I got to work with, especially on the broadcast team. And it really just kind of came together throughout the season. And then the transition to Rochester, I think working in Duluth really prepared me for that opportunity to work with the Honkers last season. So, like I said, I don't know if I have one great moment in particular that stands out, but obviously the Northwoods League Championship Series or the World Series, Summer Collegiate World Series in 2018 with the Huskies was certainly probably my greatest moment, I think, or most exciting moment I've endured so far.
And then you talk about even just forget the games. I mean, you're on the bus rides, you're eating the not so healthy food, and meeting all kinds of people, getting to know not just your fellow broadcasters, but your coaches, the players on the team. I mean, forget the games. That in and of itself is an invaluable experience.
It is. And those bus rides, I tell you, there's something else, especially for a guy like me. I mean, obviously you can't see it on screen here, but I'm a pretty tall individual. I'm 6'6". So those bus rides are really tough, especially the late ones when you're going home, those getaway days. It's tough for me to fall asleep. I can't get comfortable at all. So those nights are always the longest, but it's even worse when you have a quick turnaround right after that, or you got to wake up the next day, you got a game the next night, you got to prepare for it, and you're getting back really late. But that's part of the grind, though. And if you really want to be a part of something like this, you don't mind it. I had a couple of occasions last year where you get back really late, and then you got a quick turnaround, get to the ballpark, and prepare for a game. If you are fully entrenched and want to be a part of that kind of thing, it's not that big of a deal. It sounds something that would be torture to go through, but if you are prepared for it and you want to do something like that in your career, be a part of a baseball team that's part of the grind, you should have no problem with it. And I certainly didn't have any.
So my longest bus ride was from Lacrosse. I think I had Lacrosse to Bismarck was 9 hours, in Bismarck, North Dakota, and then Lacrosse to Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada was 9 hours. What was the longest bus ride for you either in Duluth or Rochester?
I would say it would have to be the Duluth to Bismarck, I would say. Now, we were pretty fortunate in Duluth. The Thunder Bay trip was compared to other teams, it was pretty short. It was only about 4 hours, which is still quite a bit. But when you compare it to Lacrosse or even Waterloo, you're talking about 10-hour bus rides. That's no fun. But really any trip to Bismarck is a long one because they're kind of isolated from everyone. You got to go, it's at least 6 hours. I think for the closest team, 6-7 hours. It was 8 hours about from Rochester. So that one's always long. The Thunder Bay trip is always the toughest one. Just because you're crossing the border, you got a lot of things to attend to. It's just a different atmosphere up here and a lot of adjusting you have to. So that's probably the most difficult trip, but the longest ones are probably the ones out to Bismarck.
How about your favorite hotel accommodation? Which city had the best hotel accommodation?
Ooh, I actually would say this was the first road trip it was my first series in the Northwoods League with Duluth. It was in Mankato. That hotel was definitely the best we've ever been at. And, I haven't been there since because I didn't go to Mankato again the rest of the year in Duluth. And then when we're in Rochester, they're a close enough opponent where you can bus back after the game. It's about an hour and a half, so you're not going to stay there. And then, of course, if there is a season, I'll be in Mankato this summer. So obviously I won't be staying in a hotel there. But from what I remember, the hotel in Mankato was definitely the best one by far, and it was the first one.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking about. I really like the Thunder Bay. I know it's a hassle to get there, but certainly when you think about you get your own room, which is not the case for a lot of these places. You have to share with someone, which is not the worst thing in the world. But I think Thunder Bay, the fact that you kind of had your own room, have your own privacy after a full day, is something that's nice. And I guess one thing that you mentioned was the fact that, a lot of people don't know either, is that we had to, if it's close enough, then we would bus there for the game, bus back. For Lacrosse, I believe that was Rochester and Eau Claire. Obviously, I'm assuming Lacrosse is the same for you guys. Was there any other places, whether you were in Duluth or in Rochester, that was the case?
It was just those two. Waterloo was kind of close to, was 2 hours, maybe a little bit more. Just based on the schedule worked out, we bus back after the game. That's because it was one of those home and home series. But other than that, we stayed there one time. It's probably one you could bus back and forth from. So just those two. It was Lacrosse and Mankato. Those were the only two, about an hour 15, hour 30 apiece for both, which is kind of nice being able to go back right after the game.
What about your favorite field to broadcast at? You were, again, Duluth, Rochester. You got this. I mean, I guess many of the same teams, but what was your favorite? I feel like that's a interesting question. Favorite field to broadcast at?
I would say Copeland Park for sure. And obviously you've called a lot of games there. And I would say that because that crowd fills up like no other, at least on that side, because it's basically a sellout, close to 3,000 people a night. And as a broadcaster, you like that atmosphere in the background. It's pretty good ambient noise to have, solid crowd noise. It really makes it a more conversational broadcast because then you don't have the pressure of talking 24/7 as opposed to when it's a dead silent crowd. When you're not talking, it's quiet where it's just awkward at times and the pressure's on you to keep talking, even though you don't really have to, but it just makes it easier to go about that. Not saying these other places don't fill up, but I enjoy Copeland Park the most just because it seems like the crowd's always good, games are always competitive, and it's kind of home for me as well, of course. So I like being at those as well. I mean, there's a good handful of parks I like, but I would say Copeland Park is the tops for me, at least the ones I've been to.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, Mitch, is the fact that, you're from Lacrosse, you can speak to this. For a lot of people in Lacrosse, the Loggers are really their professional team. I mean, because when you think about it, Lacrosse is actually conveniently located. I mean, you've got several big league cities, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Chicago, that are, within driving distance, but still they're not close enough to where you can just, any day, sort of, I mean, you have to plan it out, any sort of road trip. So for a lot of people, Lacrosse is really, their professional team. And when they're in the race to make the Northwoods League playoffs, for those guys, it's really like their pennant race.
Absolutely. The fans here in Lacrosse are quite passionate about them. I love sports in general. They love the Loggers. I know, talking to a few people, they're kind of itching for them to come back. And I know they've been getting some traction towards it, maybe at the start of July. Obviously, you never know. Things could change. But you're just kind of looking for that outlet. I think the Loggers certainly provide that, at least in this area of the country. A lot of big baseball fans. And you've seen that. You obviously saw that for a few years at Copeland Park, just how well and how loyal that fan base is.
And when you talk about, Lacrosse, you obviously being from there, another connection that we have is that we both worked with John Poppadopolous, one of the best people in the business. You obviously, I think, worked with him a little bit longer in the sense that with his radio show, The Sports Lead, I got a chance to learn from him play-by-play wise with the Loggers. What's that experience like? First of all, how did kind of all that happen? You being able to work on a show, and of course that relationship continues even today.
So John has been instrumental in getting to me where I am today. No question about it. I mean, he's been there with me basically from the start until now. I met him through college. He does PA at the Viterbo University where I went to school. And I remember earlier in my college career, I went to my advisor kind of looking for help. I mean, I wasn't really too familiar with people who could help get me to where I want to go. He knew what I wanted to do, play-by-play, and he knew that he did it with the Loggers, of course. So he got me his information. I contacted him, and we just took off from there. There wasn't anything he could give me at the time when I first contacted him, but then shortly thereafter, he offered me a position as an executive producer on his show, The Sports Lead, as you mentioned. And that's where I really started to develop my radio skills. It was long after that before I actually got into play-by-play, even though that's what I've wanted to do for a long time. That's when my first opportunity came up. It was for a football game, and he was my color guy for it. And I can't tell you how much it was important for me to have him right there on the spot, because I can only imagine how that game would have continued for me had he not been there. But being the consummate pro that he is, he really gave me feedback along the way that made it a lot smoother for me. He's always critiquing my baseball, even basketball. Really, any tape I give him, he critiques it, and I trust his opinion as much as anybody because I know what he's accomplished in his career. He's unbelievable on the air. He knows how to really talk. He knows how to get an audience engaged. And that's what it's all about, Billy. And you've obviously seen it with John, how much of a pro he is. And working with him for as long as I have has been huge for where I am today.
So what are your exact sort of duties with the sports league? I know you've covered some teams, but what do you do for the show?
So mostly what I do now is I cover the Wisconsin Badger basketball team. I did that for them for football for a couple of years. I didn't do that last year, but I started off as the executive producer. And then after a few years, I took on the new role of covering the Badgers for him because he knew how much, especially on the college basketball front, how passionate I am about the sport, how much I love Badger basketball. Whenever I worked for them or produced for him, whenever he'd have a segment about them, it was easy to bring me in and work me into that because he knew how much I knew about it. So when I got the opportunity to cover the Badgers for him, I was ecstatic. It gave me a new element of sports broadcasting or sport media per se. Being a reporter, it's a different angle. You're not per se or broadcasting, of course, the game, but you're at the game, you're covering it, you're talking to players. You're doing a lot of the similar things. You're just not calling the game. And that's what I do now currently. I've done basketball now for 3 years. It was unfortunately that the season folded up when it did, especially for the Badgers going into the Big Ten tournament, winners of 8 in a row, their number 1 seed for the Big Ten tournament. So it was unfortunate it went down the way it did, but it was an unbelievable season I had covering them this year. I wish it didn't end the way it did. I wish it would have continued or see what happened next, but that's what I do for them right now, and I have a lot of joy in doing that. I'm very grateful he gives me the opportunity to do that for him.
Best game that you've covered, a basketball or football with the University of Wisconsin?
I would say I'll give you one of each. I'll go football first. It was my first year there. It was Wisconsin, who was undefeated at the time. They were playing Michigan. It was an 11 o'clock game, and I remember College Game Day was there for that one because this was really the game for Wisconsin. If they won it, they were going to go into the Big Ten title game undefeated and a chance to get into the college football playoff. And I remember it was a low-scoring game, and Wisconsin ended up pulling it out in the end with a good second half. But I just remember the atmosphere and just driving into Camp Randall. Getting to the stadium once you get into Madison is so tough for Camp Randall because there are tailgaters all over the place, especially for a game like that against Michigan, a high-profile team in college football. And I think I was running a little late too, so that didn't help my cause because it was an 11 a.m. game. Got to get up a little earlier for that one. So I dread those a little bit. I wish it would have been later in the day, but I remember just how important that game was, knowing that was really their only true test, it seemed like, throughout the season. They played some good teams, but Michigan was by far the best that they played. And they were criticized quite a bit for, I think, the schedule that they played. Not many people believed in them. But that was really the game, I think, that really put some more national attention on them. For basketball, I'm going to go back to that same year as well. This was my first year covering them, and that was the first time Wisconsin had not made the tournament in 20 years, which was a bit unfortunate, being able to cover them. They didn't go to the tournament that year, but I remember it was a game against Purdue. Frank Kaminsky had his number retired, and it was a big game. Wisconsin wasn't going to the tournament. They didn't have a whole lot to play for other than pride, and a Purdue team that normally gives them a lot of trouble. They've always struggled against Purdue in their physicality. But I remember Frank Kaminsky's press conference before the game, just realizing how funny he was. I was just thinking to myself, man, I would have loved to cover the team when this team went to the national championship with him and Decker, because he was a real personality, a real fun guy to be around. And I remember that was a really, really low-scoring game. It was like 47-43.
Wow.
Wisconsin won the game, and the crowd stormed the court. And I remember Kaminsky's 44 number going up into the rafters at halftime. So I would say that one for sure is the one that is in my memory the most. I mean, there's some games from last year that were quite memorable, but out of all of them, I would say that one for sure.
Transitioning now, I guess, not exclusively to sports, we're talking about Wisconsin as a whole. You obviously being from there, how would you describe lacrosse and really Wisconsin overall as someone who has never been there?
It's a pretty good state. I mean, the weather, I think, is what its biggest knock is. You know, if you're during the wintertime, it gets really cold. There's a lot of snow. I'm not a big fan of that. Summers are pretty good for the most part, kind of hot, like pretty much everywhere else. But I like it a lot. I think, especially from a sports perspective, the fan bases here, I think, are incredible, and there are a lot of people passionate about it. And that's what I like a lot about being here. I mean, Packer fans, Brewer fans, Badger fans, even Bucks fans, they're top notch. And, you can talk the sports with just about everybody. They're following it. Of course, there's not a whole lot to follow right now, but there's just a lot of great people in terms of a sports fan base here. It's a pretty good place to live. It's kind of not one of those bigger states, but not one of the smaller ones either. Just kind of those places in the middle. That's a good spot to live. I've lived in Lacrosse for a while now, since college, still living here now as I look for my next opportunity. But it's a pretty great place to live, and the state as a whole, I like it a lot. It'd be a tough place to move away from, but, you got to go where the opportunities are. So, but I would highly recommend, if there's ever an opportunity for somebody in Wisconsin to not look away from it, I think it's a great place to live.
And speaking of lacrosse, I mean, I always, when I was there, I called it one of the gems of the Midwest. I mean, you talk about it, you got a beautiful river walk. You're conveniently located to so many big cities. The Loggers are there for professional teams. So, I mean, lacrosse and just the city overall, just a great place to be, especially come summertime.
It is. There's a lot of things to do. You got river right here, right by Copeland Park too, coincidentally. So there's a lot of things to do. You can go right on the river. You can go on the boat. There's a lot of things to do in town. So I would agree with you. There's just a lot of things to do during the summertime, especially when the Loggers are playing. That's for sure.
And are you a all Wisconsin sports guy? Brewers, Packers, Bucks?
For the most part, Packers, Brewers, obviously for sure. Badgers, I cover them. NBA fandom is kind of all over the place. I almost have more favorite players than I do favorite teams. I like the Bucks. I got nothing against them. If you're asking me for a favorite team there, I'd probably say the Utah Jazz, honestly, because Donovan Mitchell is my favorite basketball player. I love him. He's a great human being. So I would say Utah, but it's kind of been all over the place. When I first started watching the NBA, I was a big Orlando Magic fan because Dwight Howard was my guy. He's my idol growing up for basketball. I remember when I first started watching, that was where some of the best teams. I remember they went to the NBA Finals against the Lakers that one year, lost in 5 games, but that was still a great playoff run when they beat LeBron James and the Cavs in the Eastern Conference Finals, beat the Celtics in the round before that in 7 games. So once Dwight Howard left, my NBA fandom really took a hit because the Magic were so bad, and there's just whatever. I love college basketball more anyway. But that's just kind of a snapshot of where my NBA fandom is. You can call me a bandwagon if you want, but I'm more in the college basketball genre for what I watch normally.
Well, I do think now the NBA is more player-driven. I think people are more fans of players as opposed to fans of teams. I guess I could call myself a Wizards fan, being from the D.C. area, but, I'm not a hardcore fan. I'm more so like the players. And, it'll be interesting to see if the NBA resumes. Packers, I do want to bring them up because they're a team that lost in the NFC Championship game last year to the Niners. And then, obviously, in the draft, drafted Jordan Love, which many people see as kind of a slight to Aaron Rodgers. I mean, take it however you want. What was kind of your thought on that draft move?
Well, I remember I was actually doing an NFL draft show for the ESPN radio station I worked for with John and another person. And we were talking about the time they were thinking wide receiver. That seemed conventional wisdom where they were going to go, considering how many top guys there were on the board. But then they were all gone. And now the talk was, who are they going to take now? And I brought up Jordan Love. I thought if there just wasn't a standout wide receiver to pick, why not go get a potential future quarterback? And I think that is Jordan Love. And I'm okay with the pick. I know a lot of people don't like that they traded up for him, but if he ends up turned out to be really good, a 4th-round pick for him is relatively inexpensive. If anything, it's nothing. But I think there's a lot to like with Jordan Love. I don't think he can play him on day one, of course, and he's not going to. But his knock was bad decision-making. I think he forced a lot of throws last year. But now you're sitting him behind a guy who's got a PhD in decision-making and making smart throws in Aaron Rodgers. You give him 2, maybe 3 years behind him, I think Jordan Love's going to be ready to go. And as much as Packer fans want Aaron Rodgers to finish his career in Green Bay, and I think it still could happen, you never know. It's seeming less likely now. But by the time the season starts, he's going to be 37 years old. I mean, he was older than when they picked him when they had Brett Favre. So you just have to be thinking a little bit, would you rather draft a guy now, develop him, or pick it when you don't have a quarterback and force him into action right away and maybe go into years of losing? That's the way I look at it. I like the pick. I know their draft as a whole was kind of questionable, but I think they just did things that people didn't expect, and I think will work out for him.
I guess a 2-part question. Part A, do you think Aaron Rodgers has another Super Bowl in him? And then part B, do you think, you alluded to it, do you think he will finish his career with the Packers?
I do think he's got another Super Bowl year in him. And I think a lot of people are looking at this year and upcoming in particular, because now with Jordan Love in the mix, is he going to be irritated that they potentially drafted his future successor? So I could see him going on a tear this year, although they're a team that wants to run the football more with Matt LaFleur. That's the reason why they picked A.J. Dillon in the 2nd round, who I also think is going to be really good. So I do think their roster is good enough to compete to get to the Super Bowl. I mean, they didn't really do anything, I don't think, to catch the 49ers perhaps, like stop the run. They got shredded in the NFC Championship game. Did they do anything to really help them there? We'll see. Didn't look like it on paper, but I still think they're in the mix. I think they can still win the NFC North, and their defense has to go up a little bit, but it was pretty solid last year, and I think they'll still be fine. You never know with injuries, but I think they're still going to be one of the top teams, and I think if there's a year for them to get it, they could compete this year. But, again, we'll see. And to answer the second part of your question, I don't think he does anymore, because I think the way it's trending that Jordan Love is the quarterback Matt LaFleur wants in terms of his style. I think he's a guy that can manage the game the way he wants. He's an athletic kind of guy, a bit younger, big arm. This is a team that wants to run the football. So they have 3 running backs right now they could use. Love fits that. I don't think it's not a case of Aaron Rodgers doesn't fit, but I think Jordan Love will be maybe easier to control for Matt LaFleur, if that makes sense. But I think Rodgers still has 3 years in Green Bay. I think that's my prediction. I think he goes up until 40 years old, and then they may look to Jordan Love if they see him as ready to go.
And that's what I think people don't realize. I mean, no one ever thought that Tom Brady would never play for another team other than the Patriots. No one ever thought that Peyton Manning would play for another team than the Colts. But here we are. You know, Peyton obviously went to the Broncos, did win a Super Bowl. Tom Brady is going into his first year with the Bucs. So I think it is entirely plausible that Aaron Rodgers could, especially if, we see quarterbacks playing past 40, like you said. I mean, maybe in a few years he leaves the Packers and ultimately plays past 40 with another team.
I'm still surprised Tom Brady signed in Tampa, to be honest. I was never truly convinced until it actually happens. And to be honest, I could be in the minority on this. I feel like the Bucs are better off with Jameis Winston. That's just my opinion. I know he had the season that he did last year, but you got to keep in mind, Jameis Winston's never had a defense or running game. So you're forcing him to throw the ball as many times as he does. And, I know he doesn't make the best decisions out there, but I feel like for the Bucs now, it's all in on this year. If it doesn't work out, I feel like, it might be a failure in some respects. I think that Jameis Winston would have been the guy I would rather have. I guess we'll see if time will tell, but the Bucs are just trying to be relevant again. I think Tom Brady will do that for sure, so I don't fault them there.
And another thing I wanted to say about you mentioned Jameis Winston. I mean, the guy's not a scrub. Yeah, people make fun of the 30-30, throws 5,000, but he throws 5,000 yards. Not a lot of people can say that. I mean, I think he's a guy that, you'll be a respectable team. It's not like he's a scrub that can't play. So we'll see. Only time will tell, like you said. I mean, Brady, no one can question his football IQ, but, 43 years old, it's unprecedented if he does it. So, we will see what happens with that. Transitioning now to sort of sports documentaries. This is a topic I love to discuss with all my guests because, first of all, I think sports documentaries is really the big thing right now, considering we don't have live sports. And we just had The Last Dance come out, 10 episodes. Did you have a chance to watch The Last Dance? And if so, what were your thoughts on it?
I did. I watched all 10 episodes. I loved it. Watched them all live. it was different for me because I really wasn't old enough to watch basketball back during that time and really learn about Jordan the Bulls. I've always thought he's been the best player of all time. Even with LeBron right now, I still think Jordan is a better player, even though the stats might not suggest it, but just kind of watching his tenaciousness, I do agree with that. As far as the Bulls being the best team ever, I don't know about that, to be honest with you. I would lean towards the Warriors, and I would debate that pretty hardly if you came at me about it. That's just my opinion. But overall, I thought the documentary was sensational. I learned a lot from it. I think you learned a lot about Michael Jordan on and off the court, about what went behind the scenes with that team, and just a lot of interesting things I learned from it. I'm glad they moved it up and we got to watch it really before the summertime.
Well, give me, I guess, because I find that interesting, the fact that, you know, you would pick the Warriors over the Bulls. You know, you said you debated pretty fiercely. So why do you believe Warriors would beat the Bulls?
Here's my logic behind it. The Bulls, let's say they played against each other, Billy. Let's say the Bulls shot 52% from the floor, but only made 8 3-pointers, compared to the Warriors who shot 40% but made 16 3-pointers. That's 8 more threes that the Warriors made. That's 24 points right there. That's just a huge difference. And that's what the analytical people in basketball figured out. And the Warriors got to it first, knowing that, okay, we may not be as efficient shooting the ball, but if we make 23s a game, that's going to make up for a lot of it. So that's why they've been so good. Granted, you have players like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, all two are just great, phenomenal players, Draymond Green as well. That's the big difference I would see. I mean, the Bulls will be tough on them, but again, the Warriors it's not necessarily, they're not a physical team. I think they could body up the Bulls, maybe not to as big of an extent. I've heard that the Warriors would beat the Bulls in this era, but if the Warriors went back to the 90s and play them, they get swept. I don't buy that at all. I would look almost towards Warriors in 5 in either era, just because of that style, where even though you might outshoot them, they might make more 3-pointers, 10 more a game, which is 30 points just right there. That's a huge difference. That's why I would lean towards the Warriors, but I would give you the Bulls over Kobe and Shaq's Lakers, even the Spurs too. I think the Bulls would beat them. But the Warriors, just their style, I don't think the Bulls would match up well with that.
I actually agree with you. I think the Warriors would beat the Bulls, partly because Bulls never played a team like the Warriors. I mean, when you had 3 all-time great shooters, I mean, Michael Jordan never faced a player like Kevin Durant or a shooter like Steph Curry.
Absolutely.
So I think if you're just talking pure star power, I mean, Curry, Durant, and Thompson against Jordan, and who was really, you look at that team, really the only offensive threat. I mean, Scottie Pippen is a Hall of Famer, but he's not really an offensive threat. Dennis Rodman, we know, is not an offensive threat. I would definitely go with the Warriors as well over the Bulls. And speaking of going back to sports documentaries, I'm a big 30 for 30 fan. Are you a big 30 for 30 fan? And if so, what are some of your favorite sports documentaries that they've done?
So I can't say I've watched them all, but there are some that have particularly piqued my interest. I would say the 2 that come to mind as ones that I've watched or I really liked the most. I forget what it was called, but it was the one on the 90s Magic when they went to the finals in 95 with Shaq and Penny Hardaway, and the good faith or the good fortune they fell into when they got Shaq #1 in the draft, and that really took them off to one of the best franchises after they just recently joined as an expansion team. So that was interesting to me, coming as a Magic fan at about that time. And then I thought the XFL one was pretty interesting as well, because I knew what happened in 2001, but I didn't know anything about the league, what caused it to shut down, what was it all about. And watching that in 2000, or that documentary from what happened in 2001, was pretty interesting to me. I didn't really watch any of the XFL when it was back this year. I was entrenched in college basketball, not that. I'm not a guy who needs football 24/7. That's just not me. But I could be forgetting one. I'm interested in the Long Gone Summer coming up in a couple of weeks with McGuire and Sosa. I haven't watched the Lance Armstrong one, but those are 2 that come to mind, at least right now. I could be forgetting one that I do also really enjoy.
Is there a 30 for 30 that has not been done on something that you think, man, down the road, this would be a great topic to do a documentary on?
I really like maybe a player profile. I heard that Tom Brady will likely be done, I think next year, a very similar 9-part series, something like that. I don't know if any team that fascinates me really in any sport, basically in an era where I wasn't paying attention as much, maybe early 2000s baseball or something like that, or maybe more 90s NBA, something like that. I'm always interested in college basketball ones, especially, the old Big East, anything like that. I'm a historian for college basketball, baseball as well. So I don't know if there's one person in particular or one team in particular I would love to see a documentary on, but if it's a sport I follow, you'll certainly get my interest for it.
Yeah, the one that I always pivot to is the 94-95 Houston Rockets team, because I feel like with the NBA, they've really talked about all the different dynasties. You've got the Lakers, Celtics, 30 for 30. You've got the Bad Boy Pistons. You've got the Last Dance now talking about the Bulls. You mentioned the Magic, which wasn't a dynasty but an exciting team during that time. I think the Houston Rockets, you talk about that team that won 2 championships, the 2 years Michael Jordan retired for the first time. I think that would be an interesting topic when you talk about Hakeem Olajuwon, Kenny Smith, Robert Horry. I mean, all these guys that are still prominently involved in the game. I think that would make for an interesting topic.
Oh, absolutely. I remember that Magic team lost to the Rockets in '95 in their first NBA title appearance. And speaking of that, you brought up the Bad Boy Pistons. I forgot about that one. That's one I also really enjoyed. That documentary. It was different to get the other perspective of it because you saw it from the Pistons and how they really kind of beat up on the Bulls at first. And then once Michael Jordan came back better as ever, he matured, got some help. And how they just really took off after that. And the Bulls just ran the Pistons out of town, basically. The personalities of Bill Laimbeer, Isaiah Thomas, Dennis Rodman when he was on the Pistons. So that was another good one as well. And it was good to get the flip side of what happened with the Bulls' perspective and the Pistons' perspective. So that's something I forgot, and I enjoyed watching both parts of that.
Yeah, people forget Isaiah Thomas is the only player to beat Magic, Bird, and Jordan in the playoffs. And speaking of the Last Dance, I really thought – Mitch, I'm sure you probably agree. It was just good to get the Pistons' perspective with the 30 for 30, just because I felt like, look, Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time in most people's eyes. But just because he says it doesn't mean it's true. And it shouldn't be he's the good guy and everyone else is the villain. It's important to get both sides of the story. And I think it was good that there was a 30 for 30 that allowed people to go and watch the Bad Boy Pistons to really see what they were about.
Yeah, it seemed like a different era of basketball. I don't think the difference physicality-wise from the 90s till now is as big as people perceive it to be. But no, you're right. I think watching from the Pistons' perspective, if you knew about them already, I think it really gave you more of respect for them, perhaps, unless you're a Bulls fan and already hated them, then it's probably not changing. But, it was good to get that perspective of them and what they were doing and learning more about the Jordan rules. I thought that was pretty fascinating as well. So, yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Mitch, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, we had a chance to discuss a lot of things. First of all, the fact that you're able to provide sort of a Midwestern perspective, I think is always great to be able to talk about different perspectives. But, talking about the Northwoods League, like I said, you are Mr. Northwoods League because, you've been there, 3 different teams, 3 different summers. Talking about your time with Wisconsin, in Wisconsin, of course, you're from there. And, of course, different sports you've covered. So really appreciate you, man. It's been a while, and I really want to thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, anytime, Billy. Thanks for having me on. It's good to talk to you again, catch up with you, and hope we can do this again soon.
Yep, for sure. So once again, for my guest, Mitchell Speltz, this has been episode 5 of The Pulse with BP. Want to thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. And again, thank you for joining us and looking forward to the next episode.